A few years ago, I worked as a floor walker, essentially a store detective at a large chain department store. Every employee was expected to stay alert and report anything suspicious, but over time I noticed that alerts from staff had dropped sharply. It felt like people were getting careless. To confirm my suspicion, I decided to test the system myself by entering the store undercover and seeing whether anyone noticed. Because I knew most of the staff personally, the disguise had to be completely convincing. I'd been experimenting with feminine presentation for years, so I realized I already had the skills needed. I decided to take the idea seriously and planned a full makeover at a local salon. I first shared the concept with a trusted coworker, Melissa, and together we presented it to the store manager. After some back and forth, he agreed to back the plan. The store would cover the cost of the makeover and the clothing, all purchased in-house. If the test succeeded, I could keep everything and receive a bonus. If it failed, I would personally repay every expense. It was a bold move, but I was confident enough to commit. I left the meeting energized and went straight to selecting an outfit. Melissa helped me choose a sea green business suit with a skirt, paired with an ivory lace blouse. When I suggested adding proper underlayers to help the outfit sit correctly, she gave me a knowing look but still helped me pick coordinating essentials, along with hose and a pair of elegant high-heeled boots. We scheduled the test for the following Saturday, which was my day off. The plan itself was straightforward. Disguised, I would enter the store and deliberately use shoplifting techniques I knew from experience. Nothing would actually leave the building. Instead, I would discreetly place the items into a secured box in the back room that Stephen, another colleague, would manage. To keep everything realistic, I planned to make 4 drop-offs every half hour, using a large handbag to carry the items. After nearly 2 years at the store, I knew the layout perfectly, where the high-value items were kept, where the security mirrors were positioned, and how staff usually moved through each department. With the store manager and Melissa fully aware of what was happening, it felt like a controlled experiment with very little that could go wrong. All week, I mentally mapped out which items I would target. On Saturday morning, I arrived at the salon right at 9 a.m. Stephen had already briefed the staff, and I had prepared my hair and skin the night before. By 10 a.m., the person in the mirror barely resembled the one I was used to seeing. My short hair could have given me away, but no one reacted as if anything seemed off. Once the makeup was complete, the stylist brought out the wig, medium brown, shoulder length, softly waved, and styled to frame my face naturally. It was carefully secured so it would stay in place throughout the day. Feeling the hairbrush lightly against my face and neck was oddly reassuring. With the wig and makeup finished, I moved to a private room to change into the outfit I'd chosen. The makeup tones had been matched to the clothing, and I added carefully selected jewelry, earrings, bracelets, necklaces, a watch, and rings, all items from the store's own collection. Melissa stopped by to help me get dressed and see the final result. Her genuine surprise boosted my confidence even more. I'd had professional makeovers before, but this was the first time my goal was to blend in completely with people who knew me well. The challenge made the experience even more intense. Just before we left, Melissa noticed my nails didn't quite match the overall look. I mentioned it to the salon staff, and they quickly applied temporary nails, explaining they would last just for the day, perfect for switching back later. Every detail mattered if I wanted to avoid being recognized. When the nails were finished and painted to match my lipstick, I caught another glimpse of myself in the mirror and felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. For someone unfamiliar with this kind of transformation, it's hard to explain how complete and convincing it can feel to see everything come together so seamlessly. After Melissa left, another friend, Karen, arrived. She paused in the doorway, scanning the room without immediately realizing who she was looking at. I spoke up in a softer, slightly higher voice. She froze, staring in disbelief. She almost used my usual name, but I gently corrected her and asked her to call me Marina instead. Stepping closer, she studied me carefully, mirroring the amazement Melissa had shown earlier. I'd asked Karen to accompany me during the test, thinking her presence would make me seem less conspicuous to other employees. She had been doubtful at first but agreed to help if the disguise was convincing. I slowly turned in place so she could take everything in, then asked her if I passed. Karen shook her head in disbelief, admitting that when she first stepped into the salon, she nearly turned around because she didn't recognize me at all. Then she broke into a wide smile and assured me that, dressed like this, I could fool absolutely anyone without effort. As I walked out of the salon, the staff burst into applause and showered me with compliments. One woman, who had arrived after my makeover was finished, blurted out that I looked stunning and joked that she wished she could look that good herself. Being referred to as she so casually sent a rush of happiness through me. I'd never thought of myself as traditionally attractive, but in that moment, feeling beautiful mattered more than any definition. Karen stepped out beside me, dressed in a charcoal grey business suit similar to mine, paired with mid-height boots. As we walked, the steady rhythm of our heels tapping against the pavement felt strangely liberating. Thanks to the salon's work, I looked the part completely, and that sound reinforced the illusion. Karen noticed the look on my face and flashed a knowing grin. A light breeze moving under my skirt and a few appreciative glances from people passing by only added to my growing confidence. The drive to the store was short, about a mile. Sitting in Karen's car, I nervously lit a menthol cigarette, something I'd chosen deliberately for the role. As I smoked, I felt myself relax, even smiling when I noticed faint lipstick marks on the filter. Karen glanced over and teased that I seemed to be enjoying myself a little too much. It wasn't really a question, and her tone suggested she was beginning to understand that this meant more to me than just completing an assignment. Not quite sure how to explain myself yet, I suggested we keep going and talk later. I stubbed out the cigarette, checked my reflection in the mirror one last time, and then we headed inside. I concentrated on my posture and movements, relying on everything I'd learned about how to walk and carry myself convincingly. As we approached the entrance, Karen leaned in and quietly told me to relax, assuring me that I looked completely natural and that no one would suspect a thing. I nodded, choosing silence. My voice was still the one detail I worried might give me away. Inside the store, we grabbed shopping carts and began. Normally, I moved quickly and with purpose in this environment, but this time I slowed myself down, careful to blend in and appear unremarkable. We had agreed with the store manager that the test would last somewhere between an hour and 90 minutes. If our handbags became too full, Karen and I were to slip into a quiet back aisle where Stephen would discreetly collect the items. Over the course of the test, we made 6 separate trips back there, each time carrying more merchandise. By the end, the constant back and forth had worn us out more than the act of shopping itself. Although no one seemed to recognize me, the persistent feeling of being observed left my nerves frayed. I finally told Karen and Stephen that it was time to wrap things up. The moment we stepped outside, the fresh air hit me, and I let out a long breath. I reached into my purse for my cigarettes and lighter, lit one, and took a slow, calming drag. I knew it wasn't the healthiest habit, but right then it helped settle my nerves. With each inhale, the tension drained away. By the time we reached Karen's car, I was beginning to feel grounded again. She joined me for another cigarette, and we sat quietly for a moment, soaking in the strange sense of accomplishment that followed the whole experience. Eventually, the silence broke as both of us started laughing. At first it was just a few giggles, but it quickly spiraled into uncontrollable laughter. Every attempt to calm down only made it worse. It took a good 15 minutes before we could speak without laughing again, and even then we had to be careful. Finally, Karen turned toward me and said that we needed to have a serious conversation. She admitted she'd had more fun on this trip than she'd had shopping in years, but she wanted to know what all of this, my outfit, the makeup, the effort, was really about. I told her that I had promised an explanation, but suggested we leave the area and find somewhere quieter to talk, warning her that what I had to say might come as a surprise. She gave me a curious look but didn't press the issue. Instead, she started the car and pulled out of the parking space. I tried to guide her toward a quieter part of town, but she shook her head and said she was starving and needed to eat immediately. She told me I had 2 options: stay in the car and draw attention, or come inside with her for lunch and explain everything there. With that, she pulled into the parking lot of a busy restaurant and parked. I looked at her, torn between hesitation and curiosity about how long I could keep the disguise going. Without waiting for my response, she got out and headed inside. I hurried after her. I spoke up quietly, my tone edged with worry, telling Karen that if anyone figured me out or recognized me, we could both land in trouble. I made it clear that I wouldn't abandon her if things went wrong. I suggested that, if necessary, I could explain it away by saying I'd lost a bet to her and this was the payoff. I asked if that sounded fair. I'd known Karen for years, long before any of this, and trusted her completely. As my best friend's wife and someone level-headed, I knew she'd stand by me if things took a bad turn. She agreed, and together we walked into the restaurant. Before we went any further, I told her she'd need to handle all the talking when we ordered. She understood immediately. Once we settled into a booth tucked away in a quiet corner, Karen took charge, ordering for both of us and casually explaining that I had a sore throat and couldn't speak much. The waitress gave me a sympathetic look and reassured me that she'd bring something soothing to drink. I smiled gratefully, and once she left, I finally began telling Karen everything. I started by explaining the distinctions between different forms of gender expression, and she followed along easily, nodding as I spoke. I then went back to my early experiences with women's clothing, including being discovered by my mother and being sent to a psychologist. At the time, the recommended solution had been hormone treatments, which reflected the attitudes of that era. This had all happened decades ago, when understanding was far more limited than it is today. I made sure to add that my parents weren't cruel or uncaring. They loved me and genuinely believed they were doing the right thing with the information they had. It hadn't been handled perfectly, but that was simply the reality of those times. Karen listened closely, only pausing when the waitress returned with our food. After that interruption, I continued talking while she quietly showed her support, nodding now and then. By the time we finished eating and sat with our drinks, the silence felt heavier than before. Finally, I blurted out that she needed to say something. I told her I wasn't worried about being mocked, but her quiet reaction was making me more anxious than anything else that day. Without responding, Karen stood up and gestured for me to follow. I froze when I realized she was heading toward the women's restroom. I whispered sharply that I absolutely couldn't go in there, feeling a rush of panic and irritation. I told her I didn't know what she was trying to prove, but I'd reached my limit. I said I was done for the day and was heading back to the car, warning that going in there could get us both into serious trouble. I turned toward the exit, but Karen caught my arm and whispered quickly for me to stop. She explained that she only wanted to see how far I was willing to go and how committed I really was. She handed me the car keys and asked me to pay the bill on my way out and wait for her in the car. She added that she genuinely needed to use the restroom, gave me a reassuring smile, and disappeared inside. I took a moment to steady myself, then walked up to the register and paid. When the waitress asked how everything had been, I answered quietly and politely. Outside, I unlocked the car, smoothed my skirt, and slid into the seat. Once the door was shut, I rolled down the window and lit another cigarette. Karen's behavior had left me confused, but I decided to reserve judgment until she explained herself. I sat there alone, smoking and thinking. By the time Karen came back out, I was nearly finished with the cigarette. I put it out as she got into the passenger seat. She sat silently for a moment before turning toward me. She told me that my secret was safe with her. She explained that she'd done some reading on the subject before and understood the distinctions I'd mentioned earlier. What she'd really wanted to know was whether I was as certain about where I fit as I seemed. She said I appeared comfortable and fairly relaxed in my outfit, and while my mannerisms weren't flawless, they were convincing enough. It was obvious to her that this wasn't my first time. I stayed quiet, unsure what to say, as she went on. She told me the day had been eye-opening for her and likely for me as well. She admitted she'd had a lot of fun and thanked me for trusting her with something so personal. She added that she needed a bit of time to think everything through, then suggested she drop me off at home and head back herself to reflect on it all. I thanked Karen sincerely, telling her I could probably use some quiet time as well. I expressed how grateful I was that she'd gone through all of this with me and confirmed what I'd always believed about her, that she was genuinely trustworthy and a true friend. I admitted how much it meant to finally have someone I could open up to about this part of my life. She stayed quiet until we pulled into the driveway of the house I shared with Melissa. Then she turned toward me, reached for my hand, and said that she truly understood. She explained that a friend of hers in New York had gone through something similar but had no one to talk to. That isolation had nearly pushed him towards some very dark choices. She'd supported him through long conversations, and eventually he found happiness with someone who accepted him fully. She told me she would be there for me as well. She assured me she wouldn't say anything to Brian, her husband and my closest friend, because that decision was mine alone. She reminded me how close Brian and I were, more like brothers than friends, and said she believed he would understand when the time was right. There was no rush, she added, only that I should move at my own pace. I nodded, feeling a heavy burden lift from my chest, and told her I would do exactly that. For now, though, I needed to get inside quickly before any neighbors noticed me. The day had already been stressful enough without having to explain myself to anyone else. I thanked her again for listening and for her patience, acknowledging that I'd talked non-stop. I promised I'd call her and Brian soon. She smiled warmly and said she'd be looking forward to it, wishing me well. I returned the sentiment quietly as she stepped out of the car. She drove off, waving as she left. I waved back, then suddenly realized I was standing in full view of the house. Panic jolted through me, and I rushed toward the back entrance. Halfway there, it hit me. My wallet and keys were still at the salon, tucked away with my other clothes. For a split second, I froze. A few bad options flashed through my mind, none of them appealing, including the idea of asking a neighbor for help, something I desperately wanted to avoid. Melissa wouldn't be home for another 3 hours, so that was out. Then I remembered that the basement door sometimes didn't latch properly. Muttering a mix of hopeful prayers and frustrated curses, I hurried to the basement entrance. I tried the handle, nothing. I shoved my shoulder against it, but it didn't move. Finally, I took a breath and kicked hard, wincing as the impact traveled painfully through my heels. The door finally gave way. I slipped inside quickly and made sure it was secured behind me. Safe at last, I stopped to catch my breath. Once I'd calmed down a little, I climbed the stairs and entered the house. Still rattled, I grabbed my cigarettes and lighter and smoked a couple in quick succession until my hands steadied. After that, I went to the bathroom and carefully changed out of my clothes, hanging them neatly and placing everything else away. I ran a hot bath, planning to remove the makeup, wash away the lingering perfume, and let my tense muscles relax. The rest of the afternoon passed quietly. About an hour later, I stepped out of the bath feeling calmer, though very much back to my usual self. I tried calling the salon to retrieve my belongings, but no one answered. I later found out they'd closed early due to a water issue that caused minor flooding. When Melissa finally came home, I was already dressed normally and watching television. She burst in, excitedly telling me how successful the test had been. It had taken hours to inventory everything we'd gathered. Then she dropped the real surprise. Stephen, the store manager, was so impressed by how smoothly the plan worked and so frustrated by how unaware the staff had been that he wanted me to repeat the role during upcoming meetings for both morning and afternoon shifts over the next 3 days. His idea involved using a photo of me in disguise on a memo styled like a wanted notice, meant to alert employees to organized shoplifting tactics. It might sound flattering, but instead of excitement, I felt dread. I was proud that the experiment had succeeded, but the reality hit me hard. My makeup skills were nowhere near what the salon professionals had done. There was no way I could recreate that level of transformation on my own and convincingly pass again. Melissa was supportive, but her makeup knowledge didn't go much further than basic touch-ups. Feeling completely overwhelmed, I retreated to my room, convinced I was about to humiliate myself in front of my coworkers, and worse, my boss. I had no idea at the time, but Melissa understood my situation far better than I realized. While I was brooding in my room, she quietly called Stephen. The next morning, she woke me up at 7 a.m., fully aware that mornings were not my strong suit. My response was probably an unintelligible mix of complaints, grogginess, and frustration about how impossible it was to match the salon's level of skill on my own. Completely ignoring my protests, Melissa spoke in her irritatingly upbeat tone, telling me it was time to get moving because I had an important day ahead. I snapped back that no amount of time would let me recreate what the salon had done. She didn't argue. Instead, she walked away and said we could talk once I was actually awake. Eventually, I dragged myself up, shaved, and joined her for breakfast. Just as we sat down, there was a knock at the door. Melissa and I exchanged confused looks. I went to answer it and froze. Standing on the doorstep were Stephen and two women from the salon, each carrying professional cases. They looked at me expectantly while I stood there, completely stunned. Stephen broke the awkward silence with a joking comment, asking whether he should keep standing outside or if we planned to invite him in. I tried to respond but once again failed to find words. Stepping aside, I let them in. Stephen sat down at the table, while the salon staff joined Melissa in the living room. Stephen immediately praised how successful the operation had been, pointing out that we had managed to remove nearly $10,000 worth of merchandise without a single employee noticing. He emphasized how clearly this demonstrated the need for tighter awareness on the floor. He then handed me my bonus, along with the additional compensation he'd promised earlier, before getting to the real reason he was there. He laid out his proposal. If I agreed to conduct all 9 meetings exactly as planned, he would triple my bonus, give me a fully paid week off, and finally approve the installation of additional security cameras and mirrors upgrades I'd been requesting for over a year. I was completely taken aback. This was my boss, someone I'd never felt especially close to, offering me close to $1,000 in bonuses along with long overdue improvements that would make everyone's job easier. I struggled to process it. Seeing my hesitation, Stephen added one more incentive. He would give me complete freedom to test staff vigilance whenever I felt it was necessary, with funding provided for whatever resources I needed. He was clear, however, that this was as far as he could go. I hesitated outwardly, not wanting to appear overly eager, but inside I was thrilled. He wasn't just allowing this, he was actively paying me for it. Fighting the urge to hug him, I put on an act, expressing doubt about enduring the supposed embarrassment of wearing dresses at work. Before I could say more, Stephen interrupted to explain that the salon staff were there to handle my makeup for the next 3 mornings at his expense. I would have the next 3 days off, except for appearing at the store in disguise. That settled it instantly. I accepted without hesitation. Turning that down would have been impossible. Once again, the salon professionals went to work, flawlessly recreating the previous look. Arrangements were made for them to return the following 2 mornings, and I was scheduled to visit the salon later for any necessary touch-ups. Melissa and I left the house buzzing with anticipation and headed straight to the store. The plan was carefully structured. We would arrive before any other employees, and I would hide in the security office near the front. Stephen would call a full staff meeting, hand out a wanted style poster featuring my disguised photo, and ask if anyone had seen the person depicted the day before. When everyone denied it, Melissa would bring me out in handcuffs and place me behind tables draped with sheets concealing the merchandise. We arrived well ahead of schedule, and Stephen unlocked the doors for us. Everything moved exactly as planned. While Stephen addressed the staff, I paced nervously in the front office, chain-smoking and trying to calm myself. He stressed the importance of awareness and asked whether anyone recognized the person in the poster. When they all said no, he revealed that the individual had not only been in the store the previous day but had returned that evening and been caught by Melissa. He then told her to bring me out. She led me in, cuffed, and positioned me behind the covered tables. After a deliberate pause, Stephen pulled the sheets away, revealing the merchandise underneath. A collective gasp rippled through the room, followed by praise for Melissa on making the arrest. Stephen allowed everyone time to examine the items while I stood there, forcing a neutral expression and silently hoping no one would recognize me. Thankfully, no one did. Stephen turned back to the staff and asked if anyone recognized the person standing in front of them. One by one, they all said no. At that point, I slowly lifted my cuffed hands, removed the wig, and spoke in my normal voice. I explained that the entire situation had been carefully planned with Stephen and Melissa, and emphasized that the purpose was to highlight how easily theft could happen if vigilance slipped. The reaction was largely positive. Many employees were genuinely impressed by how convincingly the test had worked. Stephen then made it clear that what they had just witnessed was strictly confidential. He warned that sharing any details outside the store would lead to immediate termination. With that, the meeting was officially over, and he instructed everyone to get ready for opening. Melissa removed the cuffs, and we headed back to the office, where I tried to settle my nerves with a couple more cigarettes. A short while later, Stephen returned, clearly pleased with how everything had gone. He told me I could take the rest of the day off after the noon meeting, as well as the next 2 days aside from appearing at the store in disguise for the morning sessions. That was when it really sank in. This arrangement meant either staying fully dressed all day or going through multiple transformations daily. It was a strange situation to be in. After giving it some thought, I decided to lean into the experience rather than fight it. For the next 3 days, I remained fully in character, visiting the salon for touch-ups before the afternoon shifts and relying on the salon team for complete transformations each morning. Stephen even let me select several outfits directly from the store and added them to my bonus, a gesture that almost overwhelmed me with gratitude, though I kept my reaction professional. The excitement of those days stayed with me for a long time, the lingering trace of perfume serving as a reminder of how transformative the experience had been. Some people might question whether this really happened, but the store's records over the next 6 months tell the story clearly. Reported incidents increased by nearly 75%. And yes, for anyone curious, I did eventually get my clothes, wallet, and other belongings back from the salon. If you'd like to hear more stories like this, you can find additional exclusive content on my Patreon.